Bok-nam discovered her husband had brought a prostitute home, but instead of stopping him, he sat casually by the door, shoveling rice into his mouth like nothing had happened. Seeing his indifferent attitude, his mother burst into mocking laughter. Bok-nam said nothing. She just kept eating, each bite tasting strangely familiar, as if this scene was just another day in her life. But just then, her best friend arrived, bringing back her daughter. Bok-nam's entire demeanor changed. She rushed over and pulled them aside. Her daughter was her only hope. She didn't want her to witness her father's filthy ways. She begged her friend to take the child far away. But no sooner had they left, the woman from the room stepped out. She looked Bok-nam in the eye and apologized.
여기까지 오고 싶진 않았는데 저 인간이 사장한테 따따블 주면서 보내라고 하니까 미안해요 정말.
되게 왜 미안해요? 금순 따로 있지.
The woman urged Bok-nam to run away with her to Seoul. They could start over, escape this nightmare.
한 번 더 잡히면 진짜 죽을걸?
But Bok-nam shook her head. She knew what was at stake. Her husband's violent nature was no secret. She couldn't risk it. She declined the offer. For 30 years, Bok-nam had lived on this desolate island. 10 of those years were spent enduring the torment of her marriage. Her husband was a brute. He beat her whenever he pleased and brought women home just to torment her further. But Bok-nam didn't care about any of that. All that mattered was her daughter's safety. As long as her child lived a better life, it was worth it. But one day, while doing laundry, she found her daughter's underwear hidden in her husband's pocket. A wave of dread crashed through her. She stormed into the house, only to find her daughter prettifying herself in front of a mirror. Bok-nam couldn't take it anymore. She needed answers. She demanded to know who had given her daughter those cosmetics. But before she could dig deeper, her husband appeared behind her, furious and unpredictable. He kicked her to the floor and flung nail polish across her face. Her body went limp, her spirit cracking piece by piece. He stormed off. She could barely breathe. Tears stung her bruised skin. Bok-nam stumbled outside, a shell of herself. After all these years, no matter the beatings, the humiliation, she had endured it all. But this, her daughter, that, she could never forgive. Bok-nam picked up the sickle hanging on the wall, ready to fight her husband to the death, but when she saw the fearful look in her daughter's eyes, her grip loosened and she let the blade fall. Instead, she ran to her friend Haewon, begging for help. She pleaded, asking her to take her and her daughter away from the island. But Haewon, unwilling to deal with the consequences, pushed Bok-nam away and dismissed her claims.
씹혔나벼.
너 또 서울 가고 싶어서 그러는 것 같은데 아무리 가고 싶어도 그렇지 어떻게 그런 말을.
No matter how desperate Bok-nam sounded, Haewon thought she was just smearing her husband's name to get out. With a cold expression, she shut the door on her. With no one left to turn to, and unwilling to let her daughter fall into the same abyss, Bok-nam contacted the prostitute in secret. They agreed to escape together at dawn. Late that night, while her husband slept, she quietly stole money from his pocket. Before sunrise, mother and daughter slipped out of the house, but when they arrived at the shore, they saw the boatman was her husband's friend. Desperation set in. Bok-nam begged for help. With no other choice, she boarded. But the boatman stalled, dragging his feet. Bok-nam turned, only to see her husband already storming toward them. She pleaded with the boatman to leave, but it was too late. Her husband pulled her off the boat, and once again, her escape had failed. He dragged her all the way back to the village. The neighbors just watched, amused by the drama. Not one stepped in to help.
이를 분질러 버려라. 집 나가려는 개하고 예핀네는.
The prostitute feared for Bok-nam's life. She tried to intervene, but Bok-nam's brother-in-law dragged her into the bushes. Bok-nam, no longer willing to stay silent, grabbed a rock, but an older woman shoved her violently to the ground.
그냥 봐주면 안 되겠구먼. 옆편낸 돌에 찍혀도 되고 남정단 안 돼요.
They all turned against her. Her husband, furious at her defiance, slapped her across the face. Then came the kicks and punches. Their daughter couldn't take it anymore. She bit her father's leg in desperation. But that one act of bravery cost her life. She was flung to the ground. Bok-nam rushed to her side, but her daughter didn't move, no matter how loudly she cried.
된장 바르면 다 나. 저리 비켜.
Only silence, only grief. Her wails pierced the air, but the villagers stood in silence, as if it was none of their concern. But when the police arrived to investigate the cause of death, the villagers all claimed in unison that the girl had slipped and fallen by accident. Bok-nam stared silently at the photo while one of the old women chuckled mockingly.
조용하네. 그러면 알미가 주겠나?
최수 씨, 뭐라고요?
Their laughter was cruel, cold and heartless. The officer, looking concerned, seemed genuine at first. Bok-nam thought, perhaps, someone was finally here to seek the truth. But her husband quickly stepped in, spinning a story full of lies, that Bok-nam had tried to run away, but the girl didn't want to leave. During the scuffle, she slipped and hit her head on a rock. Just like that, with a few casual words, the officer's stance changed completely. Devastated, Bok-nam turned to her last hope.
전 그때 자고 있었어요.
Her friend Hae-won, pleading with her to tell the truth. She had seen it. She had watched it all happen from a distance, but she refused to say a single word in her defense. As she watched Hae-won walk away, Bok-nam remembered how history was repeating itself. Years ago, when they were kids, Hae-won was harassed by 4 boys, and it was Bok-nam who stood up for her. But Hae-won used that chance to flee, watching from the shadows as Bok-nam was brutalized. Not long after, Hae-won left for Seoul, while Bok-nam was left behind to suffer in silence. Even then, she never blamed her. She welcomed her back warmly. Just days ago, when Hae-won returned on vacation, Bok-nam worked tirelessly, cleaning, cooking, making her feel at home. She treated her like family. But Hae-won, she had always been selfish. With no witnesses, her daughter's death was ruled an accident. Watching them bribe the officer with gifts and cash, 30 years of rage and grief surged through Bok-nam. If justice won't prevail, then she would become justice. When the men set out to fish, Bok-nam took up her sickle with no hesitation. One of the old women saw her and instantly wet herself in terror. She scrambled backward, trembling. But Bok-nam struck again, relentless, unstoppable. At that moment, the third old woman had already fled. Bok-nam wasted no time and chased after her. Step by step, she closed in. The old woman collapsed and pretended to be dead, but Bok-nam yanked her up without mercy.
참으면 병 생긴다네.
3 down, Bok-nam had spilled blood, and this gruesome scene was witnessed by her mother-in-law. When Bok-nam came for her next, sickle in hand, the old woman had vanished without a trace, but Bok-nam didn't panic. At dawn, she calmly sat outside sharpening her sickle. Later, she found the old woman trembling in fear, confessing everything to Hae-won in hushed, frantic tones. Bok-nam crept up behind them and knocked Hae-won out cold. The old woman screamed and ran, but Bok-nam followed steadily, leading them both to the edge of a cliff. The old woman, shaking in fear, began to hallucinate from terror.
이제 그만하거라. 그만하면 됐다.
Her voice cracked in panic, but Bok-nam stepped closer. The old woman could only back away. Until she spotted the men returning from sea, she thought they would save her.
이제는 피해졌다. 꼼짝 말고 있거라. 남자들을 데리고 올 텐께.
So she shouted one last threat, then jumped. Unfortunately, she missed the water and smashed against the rocks, dying on impact. Soon after, Bok-nam spotted the younger brother-in-law. He saw her and tried to sweet-talk his way out, but she grabbed his hair without hesitation and slit his throat right there. No mercy. That brutal moment didn't go unnoticed. Hae-won saw it. She covered her mouth, trying not to scream, but Bok-nam had already spotted her. Panicked, Hae-won ran into the mountains. Just as the boatman and Bok-nam's husband returned, she sprinted toward them. Desperate, they were casually drinking water from the well, until they looked up and saw the brother's severed head hanging from a tree. Bok-nam crept forward, sickle raised, but Hae-won screamed a warning. Startled, they jumped back. Seeing Bok-nam with the sickle, they instinctively dodged her attack. Bok-nam turned and set her sights on her husband, but the difference in strength was too great. She quickly lost the upper hand. One brutal blow knocked her unconscious. By the time she came to, she was already tied up.
왜 죽였냐 이 미친년아! 왜? 뒤지려면 너나 뒤지면 되잖여.
그냥 죽기 싫대. 죽기 싫으면 살아야지.
Her husband, fuming with fury, pulled out a knife ready to end Bok-nam's life.
벅남을 죽이면 내가 고발할 거야.
돼지 몇 달 때처럼 고통 없이 죽여줄 거야. 야는 어떡할까? 아니면 살려서 네 대신 데리고 살까?
뭐?
But suddenly, Bok-nam changed her attitude. Bok-nam apologized softly to her husband and continued to flirt with him. While he was in a trance, Bok-nam used her power to bite her husband's finger until it was completely severed. And the husband was like an angry tiger. He wanted to chop Bok-nam to death, but the axe got stuck on the stake, and Bok-nam took the opportunity to pick up the knife from the ground. Her husband punched her hard, sending her to the ground, but she gritted through the pain and yanked the blade free, now unbound. She grabbed her sickle and attacked. Years of abuse surged through her mind, the image of her dead daughter, everything burned like wildfire in her chest. She slashed again and again. Not until her husband was a pulpy heap of flesh did she finally stop.
많이요. 조금만 기다려요. 된장 발라줄게요.
For the first time, she stood tall. For herself, for her daughter. There was no turning back, not anymore. After burying her husband's remains, Bok-nam headed for the shore. Her so-called friend and the boatman were preparing to flee. They started the engine, but in their panic forgot to untie the ropes. The boatman had no choice but to jump off to loosen them, but just as he reached down, Bok-nam charged from the shadows. With a sickle in hand, she hacked into him, but her injuries slowed her down. The boatman was no match for Bok-nam. With a burst of rage, she tackled him into the sea. Realizing the boatman wouldn't survive, Haewon slammed the throttle, desperate to flee alone. The boatman, flailing in the water, tried to climb aboard, but was shredded by the spinning propeller. The sea was painted red in an instant. By the next morning, Bok-nam applied makeup with care, dressed in a flowing white dress, and boarded a boat to Seoul. Her only goal now was to kill Haewon. But Haewon had already run to the police station. She confessed everything, including Bok-nam's murders. But the officer in charge was the same one from before. Afraid that the truth might expose his own negligence, he glanced toward the back office, and a dark idea took hold. When Haewon woke up again, she found herself handcuffed without even knowing when it happened. And when she turned her head, Bok-nam was already there, crouched in the shadows, staring. Haewon panicked. She rushed to find the officer, but he was already dead. Bok-nam didn't waste words. She lifted a massive hammer and swung it hard. Seeing no escape, Haewon fled into the holding cell, locking herself in behind the bars. Bok-nam searched the officer's body for keys, and found something else, a flute. It was a gift from Haewon, from when they were kids, playing music on the hills.
네가 불어줬던
도대체 나한테 왜 이러는 거야?
너무 불친절이야.
Memories crashed over her like waves. Then she began trying every key she had. But just as the door clicked open, a sudden gunshot rang out. The officer hadn't died after all. He fired repeatedly at Bok-nam. A bullet hit her stomach. Wounded, she lifted the hammer one last time and crushed his skull with brutal finality. This time, he was truly gone, but Bok-nam collapsed from blood loss. Then she crawled to the cell door. With her last strength, she laid beside Haewon, resting her head on her lap. Then, she gently fit the broken flute together again. Her vengeance had faded. Looking into her old friend's tearful eyes, all she wished was to hear one last song from her childhood before she passed, but that time would never return. Haewon buried Bok-nam on the island, the same island that had once tortured her, was now her final resting place. Though Haewon survived, she would carry the guilt and fear for the rest of her life. Perhaps the deepest hurt comes not from a blow, but from the silence of someone you once considered a friend. Haewon wasn't just a spectator to Bok-nam's suffering, he was a witness, even as a child, who chose to look away. Bok-nam grew up tormented, but still held a glimmer of hope that Haewon, his only friend, would return and keep their old promise to to run away together, but what comes is not help, but blank stares, empty words, and a silence that kills deeper than any torture on the island. Bok-nam finally chooses to stand alone, with blood and knives as his last language, while Hae-won, who finally lives, must carry the heaviest burden of all. She lives not because she's stronger, but because the person she's silent about the most chose to die to speak.